Hi friend, Niclas here. Hope you're doing well. On the show today we have one of the top bass players in the world, Tom Kennedy. And Tom has played with artists such as James Moody, Dave Weckl, Steve Lukather, Steve Gadd, Planet X, and many other great artists. And Tom also has a new album coming out called Stories. It's coming out on the 11th of June next month, so be on the lookout for it. And I got the opportunity to listen to it before it comes out in June. And if you're into instrumental jazz and funk, I'm sure you're gonna love this album, so do check it out. Again, it comes out on the 11th of June. But it was a real pleasure having Tom on the show, and I hope you're gonna enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it with Tom. And before we get into the interview, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel, either if that's on YouTube, where you're watching it now maybe, or if you're listening to an Apple podcast or Spotify, just hit the subscribe button, hit the like button too. While you're at it, the channel is growing slowly but steadily, and that's all thanks to you, so I really appreciate your support. It really helps get more guests on and for us to do some more cool stuff for you guys, so I really appreciate your support. And also, if you want exclusive access to interviews before the public, please check out the Audio Tribe email list. There's a link to that in the description below too. It's free, obviously. Just enter your name and email address and you have joined the Audio Tribe email list. And if you do, you get exclusive access to interviews before the public and some more cool stuff I like to do in the future as we grow. But that's it. Let's get into the interview with Tom Kennedy. So please enjoy. Good.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about the light. It's daytime, so.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I have some daylight here too.
I try to mainly do these things in the evening. It's nice, a little bit nicer in the background,
Yeah. Makes sense. Unfortunately, I'm in the UK, so it would be way past midnight, I guess.
Okay. What part of UK? Where are you, in London or?
No, we just moved to Leeds.
Leeds. Okay, sure.
We lived in London for 7 years ish.
I see.
Yeah. Have you been?
Oh yeah.
Gigging?
Been all over the UK. I love it. I'm so anxious to get back there.
Yeah, of course. I can imagine.
I'm anxious to get anywhere these days, but especially my favorites like Ronnie's and
yeah.
Parts of Manchester I like so much, and it's just it's a great feeling over there.
Yeah, I mean, crazy because you mentioned Ronnie Scott's. I mean, I've never been to Ronnie Scott's for some reason. I just for some reason never made it down there. I don't know why. I don't know why it didn't happen. It just didn't happen.
Well, man, my advice would be to get there because you never know, and it really is, man. It's one of the most iconic, and not to mention that, just the history of it and the fame, and all that it has, but it's the quintessential jazz listening room, man. I mean, it's one of the best places to hear music ever. And especially that kind of music, like acoustic jazz music. It's incredible. And you'll notice if you do go, I'm gonna give you a little advice. When you go in, you'll go up to the little counter and she'll say, "Okay, I'll lead you in," and they'll take you through a curtain. And when you first walk in, that's the best spot to listen to music, and you'll hear it. If there's a band, like a warm-up band playing when you come in, you'll see what I mean. You walk in that door and it's just like magic. It's really, it's like the Village, it's much like the Village Vanguard in New York. It's as iconic, and it's just as much of a great listening room, I think, if not more so.
Awesome. So who did you play at Ronnie Scott's with? Dave Weckl or
Dave Weckl, Mike Stern. I think I played with Steps Ahead a long time ago. Lee Ritenour, Tanya Maria. Just a a plethora of people. You know,
Yeah.
it's always such a great, and it's a great experience there, and everybody, man, the staff, you know, everybody is just, you know, they're so sweet.
Hmm.
It's such a professional. It's just like it really is. It's a well-oiled machine, and everybody, you know, I think is very proud of that fact. You know, it's a really special place.
Nice. I mean, what was the other place you mentioned in New York? The Village.
Oh, the
Was it
Village
called?
Vanguard. Oh, I'm surprised you haven't heard of that.
No, I
That's
haven't.
you know, John Coltrane played there. You know, just you know, all the great people. Bill Evans. You know, through the years,
Mm.
and many people have recorded there. And it's a basement club. You know, you go off the street. It's a little tiny. You know, they have a banner over the top, and you go down a bunch of stairs, and they kind of look at you funny, like, "Do you have a reservation?" You know.
Right.
But it's very cool when you go in. There's a little bar in the back, but they have little tables, and it's the same kind of vibe. It's like when you walk into this place, it's serious. You know,
Right. Right.
like you're really there to listen. You're there to listen to music, and you really get the most out of it in places like that.
That's cool, man. I mean, I love places in basements. Are you familiar with 606? It's also in London.
Yeah, I know
Uh,
that. Sure.
yeah, it's also you have to go down a staircase.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
a great one in Paris called Sunset. I don't know if it's
Okay.
there, but it's in Châtelet. And, you know, my dear friend, the late Didier Lockwood, played there a lot. And, you know, we toured a lot together, but whenever we were in Paris, Didier would go hang at the Sunset, you know, so I went with him a lot. And that's the same kind of thing, but it's almost like a Gothic looking place. And it's like the ceiling, stone ceiling, and it's a trip, you know. But those
Nice.
places have such character, you know.
Mm.
Those places. There's a place called the 55 Bar in New York, and it's just like a little, you know, like a little dive bar. But man, like the best sound and the best crowd and the nicest people, man. It's, you know, those
Nice.
places. It's like little neighborhood places. They're very cool.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
is it the case with New York where a lot of venues you have to go down a staircase like to the basement? Is that common
So,
or right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I remember, you know, I came from the Midwest. I'm from St. Louis originally, and you know, everything there was kind of like, you know, you walked in off the street and you went into this nice place. And I remember when I got to New York, it was like, okay, you go around back and you go up these set of stairs and you knock
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the door and you go up, you know, and then you walk in and there's this cool club, like, and it's like in the middle of nowhere. You don't know where you are, you know?
Mm.
And I think it was more like that in the 80s, you know, the 70s and 80s than it is now. But, you know, there's still little places like that, little hidden away places. And man, you go in and hear the most incredible music you've ever heard, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly,
You might not
exactly.
even know who the players are, you know,
Mm.
they're just, you know, they're coming out of the woodwork. They really are. You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
cool. It's very that was the thing that got me here. You know, that got me to New York in the first place was just the
Right.
fact there were so many like-minded, you know, musicians that really had to get, you know, had to go that extra step, you know, to the next step, and
Mm.
you know, and just kind of up their game, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
definitely.
think the grunge of New York is all kind of part of it, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
On your toes, you know.
Exactly. So are
Yeah.
you in New York now?
I am. Yeah.
Right, right, right. For some reason I thought you were in LA. I don't know why I thought that.
Oh, you know, I lived in LA for a hot minute,
Mm.
around 2000, because Dave and I at the time, you know, the Dave Weckl band had been touring for 4 or 5 years, but you know, a couple of guys in the band wanted to leave, and you know, we were kind of trying to refit the group with some new players, and you know, and it was kind of a serious time, and there was a lot of rehearsing involved in it, and we were trying to rehearse for a new album. And at the time, you know, I was kind of living in nowhere. I was kind of in limbo where I was living between the Midwest and New York. And Dave said, "Why don't you just come out and you know, hang for 5 or 6 months?" You know, and so I went out and I ended up staying about a year and a half, uh,
Nice.
and did a lot of playing, and you know, that's what kept me there. I met a bunch of people and I started playing. That's kind of where I met Lee Ritenour and Dave Grusin and those guys, and kind of got in with them and started playing with them some, and some other people, and Virgil Donati and Derek Sherinian, if you know those guys, Simon Phillips, you know, so it was you know, it kind of all snowballed into something, and I decided to kind of stay for a while.
Nice.
But that was it, you know. I mean, I go out there a lot, you know, and I think after I left, you know, I moved back east, but I think a lot of people thought I was still there, you know.
Right.
And I got New Yorkers say the same thing. They're like, "Oh, I thought you lived in LA." So
right.
nobody really knows where anybody lives in.
Yeah, I mean, now it doesn't really matter either. You know, internet, you can be anywhere.
I'll tell you, I would love, you know, I mean, ultimately maybe to end up somewhere in Europe. You know, I just over there, and you know, I can see myself there. I may never do it, you know, but I think it would be comfortable, and it would be easy to make the commute and do the touring, and you know, you don't really have to be in New York or LA anymore.
But do you think that's because where you are in your career at the moment, that you can be anywhere? Like, do you think you could have done that in the beginning?
It's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting, because no, I couldn't have done that in the beginning, but it depends. I wonder if it's a sign of the times, you know, more than anything else. For me, it was, you know, back in those days, you had to be in New York. If you were a jazz musician, you had to be there, you know, and you had to show up at the Village Gate, and you had to show up at the Vanguard, and you had to like show your face around, and people had to see that you were there, you know. But I think with you know, like you were saying, it's so easy to get places these days. I don't think people worry about that so much anymore. And I actually see a lot of young guys these days, you know, and a lot of young musicians with names, you know, and you talk to them, you know, well, what part of New York are you in? Oh man, I live in Kansas City, or I live in, you know, Minneapolis, or I live, you know, in San Antonio or something, you know. So you never really know where anybody is, but they're available, and you know, you hop on a flight and you're there. So,
but yeah, exactly, it's perfect.
kind
and
of
also,
a
I mean,
answer, but it is different, you know.
Yeah.
I definitely think that you kind of had to be in the place. You had to be either an LA guy, or, you know, or a New York guy. You know, like if you played Dixieland, it was good for you to be in New Orleans, you know, and so on, so forth.
But how did you like break into the industry back then? Because you said you had to be. So I guess you was it in New York you started out then too, or was it somewhere else then?
Well, I grew up in St. Louis.
Right.
St. Louis, Missouri, in the middle,
Right.
as I like to say. And I came on the scene. My brother and I came on the scene pretty quickly, you know, because we just loved music. We loved jazz. And, you know, as you know, and we didn't realize at the time, there's a very small population of jazz musicians when you know, when you think about the music business, you know, it makes up about 2 or 3% of the entire business, you know, at least the mainstream jazz stuff that we were interested in doing, the acoustic stuff. So, you know, we just grew up listening to Oscar Peterson and Bill Evans and Charlie Parker and all that. And we were so into it, and we grew very quickly, and we grew as players very quickly. And so when we were still in our teens, we started getting calls to work with, you know, guys that would come through. Right. There were a lot of mainstream artists in those days. They didn't necessarily bring their bands with them. Like Freddie Hubbard used to travel around without a band, and he'd just pick up guys in different places when he came into a town. And the gigs were longer back in that. You know, you might do 4 or 5 nights with somebody, you know, at a club. So it wasn't like, you know, or maybe like a pickup band for a concert, and you'd have a little rehearsal in the afternoon and run through the stuff, and then you'd play that night, and then they'd go on to the next place. So we played with a ton of people. We played with James Moody and Sonny Stitt and Freddie Hubbard and Barney Kessel and Herb Ellis, and just names go on and on and on. Bucky Pizzarelli, a lot of just great people that would just come through. And so we were kind of through that, we kind of built a name for ourselves.
Nice.
And Peter Erskine was one of the guys that I knew from, and he played with Stan Kenton back in those days, the great Weather Report drummer. But
Right.
before that, he was a Kentonite. He played with Stan Kenton. He was on the band bus with Kenton, and I think he was 19 at the
Right.
time, 19 or 20. And so,
Yeah.
he would come through, and we sort of got to be friends, and we played together several times. And I remember I was thinking about going to New York, and he came through to do a drum clinic, and he asked me to play bass with him. And so we had a really good time, and we kind of reminisced about the old days and all that. And it wasn't a month later, I guess, I decided I was going to go to New York, and I just packed up the car and went. And he was one of the first people I called. And of course, Dave Weckl, we're lifelong buddies. Uh,
Hmm.
so I was kind of just putting some calls out. And at the time, Steps Ahead was making a transition. The group, Eddie Gomez had been playing bass with him for a very long time, since the beginning. And
Hmm.
but they were looking for somebody. And since Peter had just played with me, he said, so you're never going to guess. We're having auditions for Steps. He said, why don't you come in next week and play? Come audition with us. And so, I'd been in New York for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days, and I was walking into this audition with Mike Brecker, Warren Bernhardt, Mike Minieri, Peter Erskine. It's like, wow, this is like heaven, man. This is amazing, because these are all guys that I grew up listening to.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Awesome.
that's how things sometimes happen. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't. It doesn't happen very often, and I felt very, 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 very lucky, and I was in the right place at the right time.
Hmm.
You
But
know, but
so I mean.
but I wouldn't,
Hmm.
I wouldn't build anyone's hopes that that's going to happen when somebody moves to a town like that, because
Yeah.
that was a rare circumstance. And also, there were certain dues that were paid already, and I knew certain people. So that really helped that happen. If you come into a place and you don't know anybody, it can take a while. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. But so it sounded like you and your brother were like a, what's it called? Big fish in a small pond. Is that correct? Like when you
That's
lived in St. Louis? Yeah.
yeah, and that's the reason we needed to get out. It wasn't that we had pretty much done everything. I mean, when you get to the point where you've played every venue imaginable, 10, 15 times, for 10 or 15 years, it kind of feels like there's not a lot left to do. And there were young guys coming up that were doing the same thing that we were doing when we were kids. And it just kind of seemed like it was the time to move on and do something else.
Hmm. But
So,
how did you? I mean, how did those people coming through, like the other artists with no band? How did they start contacting you two? Like, what was the catalyst for that to start happening?
well, as I said, since we were playing, these venues over and
They
over,
just know you,
and
right?
certain jazz clubs, and so we not only played with people that came through, we played there ourselves. We would do like a headlining trio or quartet kind of thing. And then, when Freddie Hubbard called, we had a place called BB's Jazz Blues and Soups.
Hmm.
It was a great old club, and they used to bring in a lot of people like James Moody and Freddie Hubbard and people like that. So when those guys would call the club, they'd say, well, who are the guys, man? Who's
Right.
who's the players? And get the Kennedy brothers,
Hmm.
bass and piano, and they got a bunch of good drummers they play with, and you know, and that's what they did. So
Nice.
they would just, and they fortunately they liked us. So when they came back through, then we would get the call, directly from them, and it was a thrill. I mean, it was great because we were young, we were
Hmm.
young guys, and it was just, boy, what a thrill to play with the guys that you go home and listen to on records all the time.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. It really. It's yeah. It's a dream come true, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but so how old were you and your brother then when did you say you did it for 15 years? Was that
No, I that was kind of a just a number. But
right, right, right.
I started playing around town when I was 10 or 11.
Wow.
My
Yeah.
brother at the time
Early.
was 13 or 14.
Hmm.
So, we were very young. And at the time, one of the major ones we did, Nat Adderley, if you've heard of him, Cannonball Adderley's brother, great trumpet player, legendary trumpet player, was coming through town, and we got a call to do it. And at the time I just turned 17, and Ray was just 20, I guess. And from there, I guess from that point on, we were pretty busy
Right.
with people, not only our own things that we were doing, and we were trying to do some recording and this and that wasn't as predominant as it is these days in the music business. At the time, the recording thing, that's something you did maybe if you were very famous. You put out one album a year or one album every couple of years. Now everybody has their home studios.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
In those days, so it was more about live playing
Hmm.
for us. So we just, we would just book things. We'd call around, and there was a great guy, Mark O'Shaughnessy, who was at BB's, and we'd call up Mark, hey, you have any empty weekends? We need to, I don't have anybody in here this weekend. All right, we'll come down and play.
Yeah.
We just wanted to be busy. We just wanted to stay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
That's awesome.
it was very cool. It was a very cool time. You really felt like it was kind of, like rock and roll high school. It was just everybody had a guitar and everybody was jamming out, and it really felt like that with the jazz thing. And we were very lucky in St. Louis because there was a really good jazz scene there,
Hmm.
and there were a lot of young guys, especially guys around our age, that were coming up, and they were great players. So there were a lot of people around. I remember Dave Garfield. I think you interviewed Dave Garfield.
Yeah.
Ago, and he was one of the guys that we knew, and one of the great musicians we knew, and there were a lot of them. There were a lot of guys, and
Cool.
So it was a cool scene. And we actually, we never ever had to just get together and jam with people to stay busy. There was enough work. And there were enough like little hole in the wall clubs to play and hone your craft.
Yeah,
So
perfect. I mean, yeah, that's a perfect breeding ground, obviously.
yeah. But
Yeah.
my recommendation to anybody, anybody coming up is just play as much as you can. And I think jam sessions are a great way to do it. I mean, basically we did it in these little clubs, but it was basically that. I mean, it basically was a jam session because we get together with a lot of different people, different put together different configurations and play different types of music. Like we'd put a Latin thing together, or we'd put a bop thing together, or we'd play a cool like Miles thing together. And, we try to play appropriate music and just try to stretch our imaginations as far as they could go. The time. But that's the thing. It's playing. That's the real key to it all. And there was a drummer. I know this is kind of long-winded, but there was a drummer back in town that was his name was Joe Charles. He was the most amazing, spiritual, incredible person I think I've ever met. And he was a little guy, weighed about 400 pounds. It was incredible. And he was a drummer, and he drove cars for a living. He drove cars for Avis back and forth from town to town, and that's how he made a living. But he was one of the most incredible musicians I ever met. And Ray and I, my brother and I, got hooked up with Joe on a gig one time. Played with him. It was like, oh my God, this is just it's another world. It's like otherworldly. So we would get together with Joe and get together in this tiny little place and play for like 8 to 9 hours. Like every couple of weeks, every other Sunday, we get together with him and just play. And I mean, we would start at tempo 300 and go up. It was like that. That's the best experience. That
Hmm.
really is the best experience. It's when your hands bleed and you can't play anymore, and you feel like crying or passing out. That's when you're getting there. You know.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
And I only say it because it's really important that when you decide to make a move to a place like New York, or where if you're gonna go to a major music scene, you've got to have some stuff. You got to have some tools
Hmm.
to do that. So at one point we just said, yeah, I think we're ready. Let's just do it. Let's go.
Hmm. Right.
And it's a good
Yes.
thing we had the background because both of us got thrown into a lot of things that maybe we wouldn't have been ready for.
Right. What do you mean in terms of?
Well, in style, stylistic
Right,
things,
right, right, right.
just how to deal with, attitudes of musicians,
Hmm.
not necessarily bad attitudes, but maybe just, well, like we'd been around enough pros, the guys who travel around the country and internationally to kind of know what to expect when you meet a new musician and kind of what they're expecting and what they're
Hmm.
expecting you to do. And so I think in that sense it made it a lot easier. It was kind of like it felt like it still felt like the backyard. We
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
had a new person to play with.
But what did you always make sure that you knew before coming into a new gig, so you would present yourself as a professional musician?
Well, sort of the same thing I did with you. I went online and I checked out a bunch of your stuff. And Andrew Sheps is one of my heroes, by the way.
Oh yeah, cool.
And I'm like a record Pro Tools recording nut. I just love those, and Maserati and those guys. I just love those guys. So, but it's doing your research. It's going on and kind of learning about you, learning about, for example, and the people that you had on the show. I saw Sylvia Massey
Yeah, yeah. Well, those
and,
are old ones, but yeah, exactly.
and Sarah Porter and Leland Sklar, of course. You know,
Hmm.
and I watched those things, and I watched you work, so I could kind of get an idea what you do.
Right.
And I think it's even easier in the sense of listening to someone's music
Hmm.
because there's a vibe that happens. There's an immediate feeling for the music that you get. Unless it's Chick Corea, where he's reinvented himself, 80 times in his career. But most people that you listen to, they do have a thing, and you kind of you know kind of grab onto that. And
Hmm.
so that's what I would do if I knew that I was going to go play with a group, play with somebody new. I'd get a bunch of their old recordings and I'd check it out, and I'd sort of know what they were about.
Hmm.
And even better yet, I would try to go to a gig. If they were doing a gig nearby, I'd go and
Hmm.
and and hear them.
But was it anything in terms of? But maybe it has to do with the style of music you were playing too. But was there not something like you had to learn a set list and you had to have it all memorized, or that it was? Is it a lot of improv involved instead, or?
Well, no, the improv comes within the constructed,
Right, 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 right,
music,
right.
of course, and you had to be able to do that, and that
Hmm.
was a big part of it. You couldn't lock up when they said, okay, bass solo, like you couldn't do that. You had to handle it. But yes, you're right. You're right. When I auditioned for Steps, Peter Erskine was very clear about the new stuff that they were doing, what
Right.
music they were touring at the time. And I knew a bunch of the older music, like the Don Grolnick stuff, Pools, and those older songs of theirs, which you probably don't know. But
No, no.
I knew that stuff. I'd grown up listening to that group. So I knew. I'd not heard the latest album they had done. It had just come out.
Hmm.
So Peter said, we're playing these songs on the road. We're playing these 3 or 4 songs off of the new album on the road now. So take a look at those.
Right.
So I did. I memorized those.
Hmm. Hmm.
Memorized those. I had 3 or 4 days to do it. but I memorized those and I brushed up on the old stuff that that I knew from them, just to make sure that I was playing it, the way they play it.
Mm-hmm.
Different
But so
groups, different ways, different arrangements. So I had to make
yeah,
sure
yeah,
I remembered how they did everything. But
right.
that was, that's a good example. That's one good example of it. So I did some homework, and I spent 2 or 3 hours a day working on the stuff and practicing stuff to make sure I could play through it, without a hiccup, that there wasn't anything I was going to forget, or a section of the song I was going to forget.
Hmm.
You just
Was
don't
it?
take any chances.
Yeah, yeah. But beyond learning the songs, was anything else? Not maybe not in this specific instance, but overall that you have done to also help you land the gig that you're auditioning for.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you the
Oh, did
last.
I cut out? Oh,
Yeah, it
Y-
sounded like it did. Yeah.
oh, okay. No, just asking in terms of not only learning the songs, but was there anything else you did to land the gig that you auditioned for? It doesn't maybe have to be this gig in particular that you mentioned, but in general, is there anything else you always try to nail, like not the songs, but some other part of the gig that you might be not thinking about straight away? Does that
Uh,
make sense?
you know, it's interesting because your first impression is really important. I can't stress that enough. And it's so funny because I think a lot of young guys are like, young musicians
Hmm.
are, saying, oh, if I can play, that's all I need. If I'm a great player, I'm going to go in and blow them away. First of all, you're not going to go in and blow them away, because there are a lot of great players out there you don't know anything about. So that's number one. That's not going to happen. That happened back a long time ago, when there were a lot less musicians. But
Hmm.
so many now, you can't rely on that being a thing. So you have to be a human being. You have to be approachable. You have to be nice. You have to be respectful. That's all really important stuff. It's
Right.
so important. I could talk about that for days. I should
Yeah, no, but
be
for
patient
sure,
on
yeah.
that, because that's really important. It's so much of it. You figure you play 2 hours a night if you're doing a concert tour, and the rest of the hours you're either trying to get away from the rest of the band, or you're trying to be friends with the rest of the band. And there's a lot of both. I mean, there has to be space because you're with these people all the time. But when you're together, it's got to be, it's got to be a band. So there should be a dialogue, just as there's a musical dialogue. So you want to get along with everybody. And then that's a thing in itself, because there's so many different personalities of people, and you have to know who wants to get along and who just wants to be left alone. you know it's a very interesting thing. And that also changes as you're on the road. That also
Hmm.
changes the longer you're in a group situation. But you
Hmm.
begin to learn people as you go, as you go on. The
Hmm.
thing is, you just bring the A game all the time, and definitely when you're playing. I mean, it's no, you're not, you can't look bored. You got to show up on time. You got to. One thing that's very important is to have your own sound, and have a very established kind of sound that you use, so that people know what to expect, and they know that you have a competency that way to get a good sound on stage, and to not
Hmm.
blow everybody out of the front row.
Hmm.
When you're playing, I mean, the volume has a lot to do with that, but it's also just the pleasantness of the sound, and just your professionalism that way, and knowing when you walk on stage where to be, and where not to be, and how not to be in the way.
Hmm.
And it's just those things that, I mean, to this day, I mean, we've been doing this stuff for decades and decades, and we still are very conscious of all of those things.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of times with Mike Stern's band, I'm playing on stage left, and in front of me is Randy Brecker, and I don't want to blow Randy Brecker out. You know, I don't want to play too loud. So I always ask Randy, are you comfortable? Is everything okay with you? What can I do to make things better for you?
Right.
And try to just have comfort level on the stage. And,
Mm.
Dave Weckl's here, or Dennis Chambers, or whoever it is, Steve Smith. I try to have a dialogue with these people. So all of that stuff
Nice.
is really
So yeah, yeah, awesome. But how? I mean, I think you've answered it already, but it sounds like you have to, like, being a hired gun, if I can, call you that. For some of your work, you've been a hired gun, I assume. How important is it to then just leave your ego at the door and just be like, okay, I wouldn't do this, but I have to be professional enough to let my ego sit in the back and just do, the professional thing of doing what the artist wants you to do, or the whoever's employing you.
well.
How
That's right.
often? Yeah, I think you answered that
No,
anyway.
I
So,
think it's all examples of that, because you
mm,
could come in and be a diva and throw things and turn up your amplifier because you can, you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and get in everybody's way, and that's great, and maybe you feel like you're, you know, so God's gift to music for that gig, but you're probably not going to have gig number two. And
yeah.
I've seen that happen. I've
Mm,
seen that happen. I've seen guys disappear on tour. Not in any bands that I've ever played in, but I've seen it happen. I've
right.
seen people being replaced, and it's it happens just as quickly as the attitude.
Mm,
You really, yeah, of course. I mean, that's all part. I think that's the point, is that by being a band and being together on the road and being a cohesive unit, whether you're on or off the bandstand, is exactly that.
mm,
It really is leave your ego to a certain degree. You have to be. It's also important to be very aware of your worth as a
right.
player. You have to know what you're bringing to the table in a musical situation. That's very important. And you
Can you
have
expand on
to,
that? Because that's very interesting.
yeah, you really do. And you need to have, know what your worth is when you're traveling around. It's like you don't want to get the back seat in the 19 passenger van every day.
Mm.
You're not going to get stuck back there with the luggage, like riding on top of the bass drum. That's not
Yeah.
that's not a good precedent.
Right.
It's not. It's so you've got to you have to know your worth on and off the bandstand.
Mm.
That's a good piece of advice. So but that's a real tricky situation. That's one of those things that you learn. And the only way you learn things like that is getting out there and making some mistakes and feeling like an idiot.
Mm.
And it's guaranteed. I mean, it's guaranteed that you're going to get out there and feel like an idiot. I
Yeah.
felt like an idiot a lot of the time. First few years I was doing it, or
In
let's
which ways
few
did you?
months, because I learned pretty quickly
Right.
the things that you do and the things you don't do, and when to open your mouth and when to not.
Right.
And
Would you
and
mind
that's
sharing any of
musically
those?
speaking as well.
Right. 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 Would you mind sharing any of those, like, mistakes that was very beneficial to you that you learned from?
Oh, sure, yeah. And I wish that I could remember, but I can't remember the specific uh, circumstance. And I'm sorry. I honestly would tell you if I could remember, but I remember being playing a song, and I was just inspired. I was playing upright, and I was really inspired on this gig, and I think it was a vocalist. And is that right? Somebody had just done a solo, maybe it was a scat solo or something, and something they did inspired me. So when they were finished, I kind of repeated something they did, and then kind of did this flurry of notes around it. And I remember getting this. They shot me the death ray,
Okay.
And I thought, wow, what's that about? And
Mm.
and I remember they came up to me afterward and said, if I wanted you to copy what I did and then take it a step further, I would have asked you to do that.
All right.
And so there's a sensitivity about music and about personalities that you really have to take into account. I hope that's a good example because
Yeah, yeah.
I really learned a lot from that. After I went through the phase of, oh, you're just a jerk, and I thought I don't need you. I'll be fine in the music business without you. And then, the next day I woke up and I thought, you know what, I really kind of did mess that up. I really
Mm.
shouldn't have done that.
Right.
It's, and I used to listen to highly technical bass players.
Mm.
Back in the day, I remember when I heard Niels Henning Orsted Pedersen. I don't know if you know who he is,
No,
but
I don't.
great Danish bass player. I mean, incredible.
Okay.
If you hear this guy, it's incredible what he does on the upright. And I, so I was really into that. So I remember playing, with a I think it was a saxophone player at one point, and this was way back. I think before I'd even gone to New York.
Mm.
I remember the drummer came up to me after the set and he said, the saxophone player was just going on and on and on about how he didn't need to hear his solos being played back on the bass solo.
Right.
Right? So it really makes you think about it. It's like putting things in, you really need to put things in perspective. It's peaks and valleys is the best way to describe that. I remember, if the saxophone player would play this flurry of notes. I remember my brother on the piano would start playing block chords, very simple stuff, and kind of build into his solo, play very slow melodic things, and maybe never go further than that, for contrast.
Mm-hmm.
And, you start realizing those things. And these are all the unspoken things that musicians have to finally figure out.
Exactly. Yeah.
I remember as I was getting older, a couple of times I was playing with younger musicians, and I remember a couple of guys, saxophone players, like hot rods, man. They play the head, and then it was like all 16th notes, just nonsense.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I get it now. I get what young people do. If you don't hold the reins a little bit, it runs away because it's inspiring.
Yeah,
But see,
exactly.
that's what's lovely about music. That's the greatest part of music, is that feeling like you're, 12 years old again, and you just got your instrument. You're 12 and you just got this brand new bass that you can't, or drums and, keyboard or trumpet or whatever, and you can't wait to play it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what happens. And it's really just learning how to kind of take the edges off of some of that energy, and
But that's very
fit into a situation.
Yeah, but it's very interesting, because you would think that maybe not repeating a solo, but like the relationship between a drummer and a bass player. Usually, the conversation is you repeat, some what the drummer did. He repeats some of the stuff you do on the bass, for example. So some of that feels also like you copying some vocal line or whatever. That is also part of the conversation of music, I would assume, but maybe it does have to do with being a melodic instrument rather than you and a drummer per se. Do you think?
Yeah, because I think I grew up with melodies. I grew up as a big Charlie Parker fan, and I always loved the right hand of the piano more than the left hand of the piano. I was less rhythmic and more melodic the way I grew up. My brother was the same way. And so we played very melodically. My brother would play chorus after chorus without using his left hand on the piano. And it was a great effect. I mean, it really sounded like a horn, And as I said, when I heard the guys, like Stanley Clarke was the first guy I heard that, and I'm talking about his upright playing, the early Chick Corea records. Man, I heard that facility and I thought, oh my God, it's endless what this instrument can do, and I need to learn how to do that.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I want to play the stuff I'm hearing in my head. And I never really cared for bass solos all that much.
Hmm.
Because most of the time, guys, in the old days, I mean, they had gut strings and they were kind of struggling to get around on the thing, and it's a big instrument, man. I mean, you can only play so much on this instrument. At least back in those days, trying to get a big acoustic sound and get the notes out.
Right.
It's difficult. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that was it. I think once I would kind of got the bug, the technique bug, I kind of wanted to learn how to do that.
Hmm.
And then I started, but then you want to pick good notes to play. So then I started emulating, I started, well, transcribing and kind of copying, things from a lot of horn players and guitar players and piano players, as opposed to really listening to bass. But to get to the point that you were talking about, I always had this good sensibility with drummers. I always had that, and I played drums for about 10 years.
Right.
While I was bass player, of course, I played bass first, but I played drums for a long time, and I really loved drums. And, I remember when Dave Weckl and I first met each other, we were 15, 16 years old, and we played together, and it was just like we had played, our entire lives together.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we kind of both came from a similar place. And so that for me was kind of second nature as far as being able to play in time and to be able to seek out a drummer's time and play well with them. It was
Hmm.
really something that I didn't really ever think about so much.
Hmm.
So this is really the only way I can explain it. It really felt like that was just second nature. That was just always there. I
Right,
always
right,
had
right.
a good feel with drummers, so I didn't think about that so much. So I was always
Hmm.
thinking about the other part of it. I was
Hmm.
always I was thinking about more of the soloistic ideas and trying to create really interesting, walking lines on the bass, on the upright bass. Like Ray Brown
Yeah, yeah.
was one of my, was my hero, and you might not even know who he is,
No, I don't.
but Ray Brown was amazing, in creating these bass lines that were all over the instrument, and they created all this, this drama, in the music. It was great. I mean, it was incredible. He'd be up way up high, and then he'd play a low note. It was just like like that. It's just like a blind that everything would just fall out of it. It's
Oh, yeah,
a
yeah.
really incredible thing. And
Nice.
so, those were the things I was thinking about. I was never really thinking about pulse, and really playing with the drummer. Because I think I played a lot like a drummer as a bass player. I always played quite a bit. I always played a lot of ghost notes. I
Hmm.
never
Hmm.
just play a bass line. I've always got little ghost things happening. And that's because I think about the snare drum, on a drum kit,
Hmm.
ghost
Hmm.
stuff play and so I kind of adapted that to bass.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, the long and the short, after the long of it is I was sort of a bass player drummer.
Right, right,
So,
right.
and it was very natural for me when I would meet a new drummer to
Hmm.
play pretty quickly with them and kind of be able to feel them, pretty fast.
Right.
Within 8 bars, I kind of was there. I
Yeah,
could
yeah, yeah.
tell where they were putting the time, and then we would lock in together.
Right. That's great.
Just as
Something.
just as they hear me, it works
Yeah.
ways, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. But something like to expand on the bass playing part, because I heard you speak about, a bass player should be able to lay down a great foundation, and if he can or she can, they will get all the work essentially, or most of the work. Just wondering, what does it mean to lay down a great foundation as a bass player?
The main thing is to spell out the chord as the
Hmm.
chord happens. That's one of the biggest things is be a root player.
Right.
Those roots have got to be there. And there's got to be something, within the notes between the root and the next root that makes sense with the existing root, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
It
yeah, yeah, yeah.
has to be like a very linear, like obvious thing. That's what was, for me, was one of the most magical, incredible things that Ray Brown used to do, because he played all over the bass, and he played very interesting and seldom repeated a chorus where he played the same bass line. I'd hardly ever heard him do that. But everything that he played was leading. He would play this note, but you could tell what the next chord was by what he was building up to. You could hear what was coming, and that to me is mastery.
Now,
Because
how do you do that? Is there always, not always, but is there some music theory behind that you can always apply, or does it have to do with other
it's
stuff too?
it has to, it's more that, yes, of course there's music theory to it, although bass players are famous for playing a lot of chromatic lines to get places. Like the last three notes especially, you'll notice, getting to a new chord, if it's an E flat chord, bass player play D flat, D to E flat, right? And he'll get there, he'll arrive there, because that's sort of that little ramp into the next chord. But for me, just as important that is direction. It's which way you're, if you're ascending or you're descending.
Right.
With your line. That's another way to make it very obvious that you're going from this chord. You've already played that chord, so we know what the chord is now. Okay, so the trick is now we're walking to the next one. And it's funny if you think about, visually, if you think about somebody, here's A, here's B, C. So, they start here, they got to walk back here and then walk out to here to get to the next one. It's that's what I'm talking about. It's like making a very obvious movement toward the next, whatever the next bass note is going to be.
Yeah. But what do you do if the chord holds out for a very long time? Do you just stay on the root, or do you add other chord notes?
Yeah, you kind of do. I mean, there are all kinds of, like if you look at rhythm changes, I've Got Rhythm, that old song, and so a lot of bebop players built, they took those chord changes and made a lot of new, songs out of those chord changes. They put different melodies over them, and it was called rhythm changes. But it all came from this George Gershwin song called "I've Got Rhythm."
Right.
So you're familiar with rhythm changes, I'm sure.
I think so. Yeah.
But there are a lot of different ways to play rhythm changes. There are a lot of substitute chords that you can play. Same way with the 12-bar blues. There are many different ways you can play those chords. You can shift them around. You can change keys. You can go in half steps up and down. To get to the same places. So that's sort of what happens when you're playing a bass line over one chord. You can look at it that way, or you can try to lock into a series of notes that just have a feeling. Like I've heard, one of my favorite things that Ray Brown does is play 1-5, just back and forth. But he'll play it, like if it's E flat, he'll play E flat and then a lower B flat. So it's a doom, 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 doom. Man, there's nothing like that. Because it gets away from that whole moving thing that you normally are doing. When you're walking the bass, you're picking different notes. So you're never playing two notes at the same time, or very rarely, So when you do play a couple of notes, or you just sit on a root, or you play a root 5 like that, man, it has such an incredible effect.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's genius. I mean, that's really genius. I mean, that's the stuff. Those records, I would crack up. I just start laughing. I'm just like, how did he come up with that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very, very fascinating. Very fascinating.
It really is. It really is, because it's getting in the mind of someone else. And that's what you finally figure out. It's just like, okay, well, yeah, it came to them for some reason, but it probably was just as natural as the way I do this.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's so great about musicians. You know, all of us are individuals. We all do our own thing,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
but collectively, it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super fascinating.
Yeah.
But I mean, I love to ask you because I know I heard you say Larry Graham was a big
Oh
inspiration
man.
for you,
Yeah, yeah.
because he was for me too when I started out playing bass. Like I love his Graham. What's it called? Graham Central Station, right? Is
Yeah.
that the band?
Yeah.
Have you that was the band you fell in love with too, right? Or
Oh man. No, I was in high school.
right,
This is
right,
a
right.
great story, by the way.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
sure.
was in high school. My father owned a music store. This is why we're all musicians. See, my
Yeah.
father had a music store. It was predestined. You know, it was just
Mm.
all gonna be musicians. But I remember we were, a couple of nights a week. The store would stay open until 9 o'clock, and most of the nights it was open till 6. So I was, but all of us worked in the store. It was a family thing. So I was a kid. I was 13 or 14,
Mm.
and I was in the store with my dad, and it was like 8:55. It was getting ready to close. All right, it's 8:45 realistically. And this
Mm.
guy walks in, and we had these basses over on the wall, and I was a big upright player, and I owned an electric bass, but I never really played it all that much. I was a big upright guy, and this guy came in, and we had this jazz bass copy sitting there, and he said, "Hey man, let me take a look at that bass." And he kind of playing on it a little. He said, "Can I plug it in and hear it?" So we plugged it in, and he sits down and he starts slapping, and he starts popping, and it's like, my eyes almost came out of my head. I was like, "What are you doing, man?" I was just watching it, and this guy had a good groove, and pretty soon as he was tapping his foot, and playing, it was like, "Whoa, get out of here!" I'd never seen it before,
Mm.
and I remember sitting there watching him, and my dad said, I remember my dad saying, "Tommy, it's time to close." And I'm like, "Just a minute, just a minute, just a minute." And we watch this guy play. And all of a sudden he just gets up and he goes, "Yeah, your father's closing the store, man." Gives me the bass. He goes, "Thanks, man." Like that. And I said, "Man, I've never seen the bass played like that, man." I said, Where'd you learn to do that, man?" He said, "Go buy a Larry Graham album."
Mm.
Walks out, never saw him again. That
Yeah.
was it. It was really just like it was like a
Revelation.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that very next morning I found a Larry Graham album, and I remember I heard the jam.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, ain't no about a doubt it was the name of the
Mm-hmm.
album. And I remember I heard that, man, and I had that in my head and my heart for like 6 months.
Yeah.
After that, I remember I used to walk home from school, and I was walking in that tempo of that song. I mean, I was
Mm.
just living it. And I went out and got it, and I got a new bass. I got a Fender bass. I didn't have a decent bass to slap, so I had to get another bass. And I started learning how to do it. And I actually got pretty good at it. I don't do it anymore, but
Right, right, right.
I learned it, and I did it a lot. And boy, that really changed things for me.
Mm.
It opened me up to so much more stuff. And it was just after that I got turned on Earth, Wind, and Fire,
Right. Cool. Yeah.
which changed my life even that much more.
In which
You know?
way?
Oh man, I mean, just the possibility that you could play jazz in other ways.
Right.
Because I really, man, those guys were jazz players.
Mm-hmm.
They wrote jazz tunes. You think about a lot of the chord changes that those guys use. They're jazz musicians. You know, and a lot of it was about like these open jams where they were laying down grooves and the saxophone player was blowing away and all that. These guys were jazz guys.
Yeah.
That were hella funk players.
Mm.
And so that was amazing to me, man. You talk about opening your eyes to something else.
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah. I
that
hear it.
broke
Yeah.
me out of the, that was the thing that really broke me away from the mainstream stuff, or it opened up this other possible, direction to go in.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that I was going to stop playing that stuff. In fact, it was
Mm.
hilarious because I used to go play a jazz gig, man. I'd be playing a bop gig one night, playing a funk gig the next night, and then I joined the Philharmonic Symphony in St. Louis. So the next night I'm bowing with my little,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that really, like, that's when it really felt like it started to open up, and that was a good lesson for me because uh, I was I had also, earlier done a bunch of studio recordings. I'd done a bunch of jingle recordings for this jingle house in St. Louis, and so we did everything from country and western to pop music to rock to, so there was, that was all of that stuff. It's really just good experience, and it's just the growth process at that point was exponential, because I was
Exactly. Yeah.
growing in every way possible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because I was listening to your new album too, and there was a song called "The '70s,"
Yeah.
which is a really, really great song. But that you're playing on that song, talking about the bass players, from back then, it really reminded me of Jaco Pastorius.
Oh yeah.
Uh, I forgot the name of the album for some reason, but you know the album he released with just his face on the cover. What's it called?
Yeah,
You know
that's
which one I'm talking about?
Pastorius. It's
Yeah,
its debut thing. Yeah. Come on,
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the song it reminded me of. Come on, come over. Is that it?
Yeah, come on, come over. Which is funny because I got, I knew about Jocko forever, and I heard that
Mm,
album when it came out. I
right.
remember that I had a bass player friend that was much older than me, and he was blown away by the record. And I remember hearing it, and I thought, "Wow, that guy's amazing." And I just didn't think about him anymore because I was
Okay.
I was into some other cats.
Right, right,
I
right.
was into other players at that time, and I was doing, and I knew he was there, and I knew I'd get around to him at some point. But I kind of was into these other bass players. And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't listen to Jocko for quite a while. And of course I did, at some point I got into the Weather Report stuff and a lot of his solo playing and all of that. The guy's, what are you going to say?
Yeah, exactly.
But what are you going to say about Anthony Jackson? What
Mm-hmm.
say, what are you going to say about Abraham Laboriel? And these guys that aren't necessarily solo bass players, but good God, man, what they've done, Chuck Rainey. I mean, they're just too many, man, and they've all done these incredible things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, Jocko was amazing. I never really wanted to have that sound. You
Right.
know, I really, that really wasn't where I was coming from. I was more of an
Yeah.
energy guy. I was more
Mm.
like an Anthony Jackson guy.
Right, right, right.
I really loved the bottom end of the bass and what he was doing that way.
Mm-hmm.
He would just break out, but the way he would disappear. But every note that he played on the thing was exactly what and where it was supposed to be.
Right, 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 right. Yeah.
Times 10.
Mm.
It was just ridiculous. I mean, if you listen to anything Anthony Jackson, you really pay attention to what he's doing, it just
Mm-hmm.
blows your mind, man.
Right. Yeah, I gotta go back and check it out again.
Oh
Actually,
my
well, it's been
God.
a while. It's been a while.
I'll tell you what, when we get off of here, I'm going to give you a list of about 10 or 15 things to listen to, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
Pleasure.
even just like the simple stuff. Like the
Mm-hmm.
simple stuff, if you listen to what he's doing and where it sits, and the duration of the notes and the sound, oh my God, it's like that's a lifetime study.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
And it's all natural. And it was the same thing with Jocko. Jocko
Mm.
just, it was natural. That's who he was.
Mm-hmm.
I love talking to Mike Stern about him because they played together a lot, man. They were
Oh,
like
right,
buddies, and
right.
Mike has great stories about Jocko and Anthony.
Mm.
And I've become friends with Anthony, and I know Abraham Laboriel and a bunch of those cats that are just my idols, man.
Yeah.
And that's special.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely is.
It
Yeah.
really makes a difference. It all makes a real difference in your playing
Hmm.
because it is all inspiration. It's,
Yeah.
it really is what you're inspired. That's what you're become. What you are going to become are pieces of what happened before you, and it's the way you put the puzzle together.
Hmm.
I remember Wayne Shorter said, "Yeah, it ain't the eggs; it's how you scramble them."
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really true. And everybody's going to scramble them a little bit different,
Hmm.
and the result is they're going to taste a little different. So,
Exactly.
everybody's going to come out sounding a little bit different than someone else.
Yeah, but that's a really good point because that's something I thought about a lot. Maybe more last year, but I don't know. I had a period where I thought everything on the let's say Spotify top hits like worldwide, right? Like every song to me sounded the same because there's no people playing, right? On modern pop hits, it's always the same drum samples, always the same sort of rhythm being programmed. So sometimes you lose that where you just mentioned. You lose that scrambled, like you lose the egg being scrambled differently, right? On modern hits, which is can be sometimes annoying.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's true. I to be honest with you, man. I mean, I hear enough of that stuff. I
Yeah.
hear enough of it when I'm out and about to
Mm.
have to listen to it at home.
Hmm.
So I don't, and I don't mean have to listen to it as a bad thing. What I try to do, I'm really like I trying to think. K Flay, I heard some stuff by her, Billie Eilish.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's some stuff going on, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely, there
Amazing
is. Yeah.
stuff in this, and these are people doing it differently. I mean, Billie Eilish's brother, he's incredible.
Hmm.
And the stuff that they come up with, and it is original in its way, and
Mm.
so maybe it's not so much that the samples are all that different, but it's the way they're still scrambling the eggs in the sense of how they're putting the stuff together
That's
musically,
true. That's true.
or the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
chords or the melodies or the way they're arranging things,
Hmm.
and the backgrounds and whatever it is. So I believe that it's out there. I mean, I feel like I'm anymore. Listen, I don't want to judge anybody, but I know what I like. So if I hear something and I like it, man, I have that right. I have
Hmm.
that right to like it. And then if I hear something else that I don't care for so much, I'm not going to say I hate it. I'm just going to say it just doesn't fit or suit me, my ear. And so, there are 10 million other people out there that are going to love it. So that's cool.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Then again, that's all about the individualism of everything.
Yeah. Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
and it's cool. And if, the thing that would be that the reason that everything sounds the same, or that a lot of things sound so much the same, is that's what people expect that.
And
They
that's boring.
they want it to be familiar,
Yeah.
because people aren't looking at it the way we are. They're not dissecting it, and they're not trying to have a spiritual experience from it. It's background, or it's just something that it's like putting on a Netflix movie.
Hmm.
You,
Hmm.
you don't want to think too much. You put on a comedy and you just sit there, and something makes you laugh, and it was a nice 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the way a lot of people listen to music, and that's great. If we didn't have
Yeah.
those people, we wouldn't have a music business. So I really, and,
Yeah.
and I think that's an important thing to remember when you're building the music as well. you know
Yeah. It is true, but it's also, I guess, because maybe not, but like what you just mentioned, that music has become a commodity. That to some degree is annoying. But you also have a point in what you're saying. It probably has to be there, but it's also annoying at the same time.
it's annoying at the time, but I think it's funny because it's still the old truth that the world cannot exist without it. The world
Yeah,
cannot
yeah.
exist without art in some way, shape, or form. And music itself, by definition, you call something music, it's art, right?
Mm.
So, just the movement of notes and those frequencies and that stuff going through the air, whatever that is, you know, if it has if it has notes, if it has tones, it's music, and we can't, we really can't live without it. It's so
No, exactly.
that's magic, and that's great, and that's what's great about it. I mean, it's really interesting for me. It used to really upset me,
Right.
that I thought, well, it's being dumbed down so much that I just don't think it's going to be music anymore. But I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I especially don't like, as I get older and I see like young people grabbing the torch and going somewhere else with it,
Mm-hmm.
and then, just when you think pop music is done, there are these artists that come out and they're doing something different. It's like, whoa, that's cool. That's
Yeah,
really
exactly.
cool. That's like music. That's melodic, and that it has a feeling. It moves. I feel movement from that.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
I really
definitely.
think it survives. No matter what. I really do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have to agree at the same time with you. That's I think that would always be the case. They will always be there, and we need it, obviously.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I think 100%. I mean,
Yeah,
well, I can. I need it for me because I
yeah, yeah.
it was funny. I've been asked to do for another publication, put together my 10 favorite albums on a desert island.
Right, right, right.
And it's funny. It's like the first 4 or 5 are very easy, and then you get into the next 5 or 6. The last 5 or 6, it's like this is a little bit harder because it actually opens up. Like all of a sudden the possibilities become more and more exponential.
Mm.
As to which ones I'm going to pick. You know,
Right, right, right.
it's.
So have you picked them or
I'm still working on it.
right, right, right?
In
What's
my
the
defense, it's
is
only been 3 or 4 days, and I
right,
haven't
right.
thought about it all day. So it's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'll put it together.
yeah.
And when I do, it'll be easy, and it'll be easy to explain why I love what I love
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
records. But just, I mean, it really is something and that to me is something very interesting too, that, I would love to do a little more exploration about, is why you can listen to certain music
Hmm.
over and over again, you
That is
know,
very interesting. Yeah.
and why certain music is amazing, but you listen to it a few times and then you kind of want to move on to something different.
Hmm.
And what that is about, what it is that resonates, with a person that maybe doesn't resonate as much,
Yeah,
another thing.
that's interesting.
That's
I
that's that's your next challenge.
yeah, exactly.
You got to find a music scientist to
I
explain it.
have. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That would be cool. But
Yeah.
Tom, it's been a yeah, real pleasure having you here.
Oh, same,
Um,
same here. Thank
Maybe
you.
before we wrap up, could you let the listeners know or people watching where they can find more your music, your new album, all
Well,
that good stuff?
thank you. I'm TomKennedyMusic.com. That's my website, if I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course.
And iTunes, Apple Music, they have my last ones. The newest album is called Stories, and
Hmm.
that will be coming out on Autumn Hill Records, actually on June 11th. Write it in your calendar. But it's on Autumn Hill Records, which is Rob and Mike Silverman, who are dear old friends from my old stomping grounds back in St. Louis.
Nice,
They
nice,
have they
nice.
have a really exciting new label that Dave Weckl has done some things. A bunch of other people have done things for them. Eric Marienthal and various people. So
Cool.
it's good. It's the hot new label. So
Nice.
really proud to be represented there. But yeah, it's all the online stuff, the online stores. You know, and again, the album's called Stories. I'm really excited about it. I wish we could have actually talked a little more about that, but
Yeah,
next time.
exactly. I mean, all I can say, because I've heard some of the songs, and is, yeah, I loved it. Like I said, the song "The '70s" kick-ass song, and there's many more songs that I need to listen to. But so far, really, really good. So again, recommend people check it when it comes
Well,
out.
thank you. Thanks for listening, man. I'm glad you like it. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. Yeah, yeah. Well, Tom, thank you again.
thank you, Niclas.
Thank you, Tom, for coming on. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and I hope you, the listener, enjoyed it as well. Again, don't forget to check out Tom's new album called Stories, coming out in June. Great album, awesome instrumental jazz, funk stuff. So if you're into that music, I'm sure you love this album too. Again, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I have a podcast, Spotify, wherever you are listening or watching this show. Also, don't forget to check out the Audio Tribe email list. It's free to send your name and email, and you have joined the Audio Tribe email list. And if you join, you get exclusive access to interviews before the public and much more stuff I like to do in the future. But that's it for this week. Again, awesome to have you here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I will see you next week again. So take care and see you soon.